Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and yesterday in Parliament there were a few votes, some debates. So what I want to talk about were, well, the votes on the motions. There were three non-binding motions that were put forward for a vote. That basically meant that voting in favour of them or against them didn't compel the government to do anything, but they were seen as symbolic. As such, Theresa May made it clear to her MPs that defeating her motion would make it more difficult for her to negotiate with Brussels. Of course, everyone knows that there are no negotiations going on, but let's get on to her motion in a moment. There were two others. The first one was by the SNP, the Scottish Nationalist Party. They asked for an extension of 3 months to Article 50 because it's quite clear we're not going to get anything useful done before the end of March. It received next to no support. It did receive some support, but not really much from Labour or the Conservatives, because the leaderships of both those parties had their own motions that they wanted to put forward. So for Labour, Jeremy Corbyn put forward a motion which basically insisted that the government give Parliament a real say before the end of this month. That means she presents her deal for a definitive vote, or she allows Parliament to have a proper say on what happens next, not just indicative votes, just as advisory votes. That didn't go anywhere either. Obviously, Labour largely supported it. A lot of people supported it. But the government and the DUP were dead against it. So although it didn't fail by a lot, it failed along the party lines as expected. So that was largely pointless. So the third and final motion was set by the government. It simply asked three things. It asked MPs to approve of the Prime Minister's negotiating position in terms of her efforts to get a change to the backstop, acknowledge that negotiations were ongoing, and to understand that the House does not want a no-deal Brexit. In other words, it was a combination of the two motions that received a majority vote 2 weeks ago. So the ERG were fine with the first two, even though everyone knows that they are untrue. MPs are not really seeking a change to the backstop, even though some of them would like it, because they know it's impossible. They also know that there are no negotiations usefully taking place to this mythical change to the withdrawal agreement. But what the ERG took exception to was the one aspect of the motion which is actually true, that Parliament wished to avoid a no-deal Brexit. Now, they oppose this because that's precisely what they do want. Of course, that's not the reason they gave. The reason they gave was, it will reduce your bargaining position if you take no deal off the table. Not that this motion did explicitly take it off the table. But the other thing is, you'd have to be fairly dim to believe that reasoning, because that doesn't weaken her hand in negotiations. What does weaken her hand in negotiations is having Parliament constantly vote her motions down, which is exactly what has happened here. It's very, very rare for a normal majority government to ever be defeated. Every now and then they do. Every now and then a government makes a serious misjudgment and is defeated, but it's quite rare. But it never happens with this sort of frequency. Now, it's quite funny because the media kept talking about how May had united the party behind her with the motion 2 weeks ago, which called for her to renegotiate the backstop. But the party wasn't united at the time. They just happened to vote for the same thing, but for completely different reasons. The ERG voted for it because they know that renegotiating the backstop is a complete waste of time. And wasting time is good because it makes no deal more likely. But many of the rest of the party voted for it either because they were just doing as they're told. There's actually quite a healthy number of MPs in the Conservative government that will just do as the leader tells them to. And for the other ones, they don't wish to destabilise their leader. Now, the remaining groups that voted for it would have done so just because if most of the party are going to vote for it anyway, they may as well. There are only a handful of MPs of either party, of the big ones that is, that are going to vote against their own party if they're going to be the only ones doing it. So the rest were just sort of falling into line like good little sheep. But the latest vote was completely predictable. I said before, if anything is ever laid before the House now, the ERG will vote against it. It's obvious. They didn't actually vote against this one, it has to be said. It's never ideal to vote against your own party. They'll always seek to avoid that if they can, but they will do it to get their own way. They actually abstained to make it look a little bit better, but only once they'd ascertained that it would receive enough opposition opposition. You know, if the opposition would have supported it in any significant numbers, you know, then they would have voted against it. So earlier in the day, when they were being asked how they were going to vote, they were saying they were still mulling it over. What they were mulling over is how are the rest going to vote for it? Because they'd have loved, as they did, to abstain, and they just wanted it to be defeated. All right. Anything that keeps no deal the default position, they are going to support. And as I say, it didn't explicitly take no deal off the table, but it was an implication that action should be taken to avoid it. Now, they don't want that at all. So what did we learn from the various voting? We learned that the SNP and the Liberal Democrats are committed to keeping us in the EU, or at least, if we have to leave, having us leave on the best possible terms. Nothing new there. We learned that Jeremy Corbyn is still unwilling to get behind the only action that could actually avert this disaster that he has the power to get a majority for, namely a referendum, something that his party are also calling for, grassroots members and MPs. So nothing new there either, that he's rebuffing all of those. We also learned that both the majority of Labour and Conservative MPs are royally pissed off at their respective leaders, both of them making various threats but not actually doing anything about it at this point anyway. So nothing really new there. Except it's not 100% true. There is a little bit of a ramp up on the Conservative side, especially the pro-EU majority. They're now less cagey about criticising the Prime Minister, and they are threatening to resign their ministerial positions. Now, it has been reported, until someone does this, who knows, it's been reported there could be as many as 12 ministers resign over this in the coming days, including 6 cabinet ministers. Now, if 6 cabinet ministers were to resign at the same time, that would massively, it would basically almost destroy the government. It would be a massive blow to Theresa May, as if these votes already weren't. It would be huge, because she effectively wouldn't have a functioning government. Now, there was one unnamed minister quoted as saying, as I say, they're getting less cagey about it, but they're still not like making public announcements as such, but they're talking to journalists. So there's one who's quoted as saying, she has a choice. Seek the agreement across the House or the country will be out without a deal. They don't compromise, they never have. Now note what they're saying there. She has a choice. Seek agreement across the House or the country will be without a deal. He's not saying, or she's not saying, because I don't know who it is, seek the agreement across the House or we will take action to push you out the way. They're not saying that. The other thing is it says she's worried about splitting the party, but the party could split either way. Yes. She should be worried about our side of the party. In Parliament, there is nowhere else for the ERG to go, but there is potentially somewhere else for the Remain wing to go. We are more likely to trigger a realignment. But the problem is statements like that are the same sort of statements that have been happening all the time. And that's why it's been easy for her to ignore them. They're saying, oh, we could resign. We could trigger a realignment, which basically means a split in the party. We could do this, we could do that. The ERG are giving real threats that everyone knows they will go through with because they're mad dogs. So we've had these false dawns before. Moderate Conservative MPs, especially those who are pro-EU, getting angry. And yes, it's natural to think, oh, these MPs are getting really annoyed. And they're publicly saying so. Oh, and they have the power to influence events, so that's what's going to happen. But it's never happened before. They keep doing this. And they've been silenced time and time again with threats of destabilising the government and the same threats of consequences to the party and guilting them with loyalty to the party still being brought out. And it's still working. Unless something, as I say, happens in the next few days. But there's no sign of it other than people getting a bit belligerent again. So although it has the potential to see something happening, I'd prefer to wait until actually something does happen before I get excited about it. I'm not going to try and, make too much out of it. The bottom line is that they are right to say that the ERG will never back the party. Nothing Theresa May comes up with will get their backing other than no deal. They're right to say that the ERG are not actually Conservatives at all. The only difference between them and UKIP is that the ERG want power, not just to shout drunkenly in a pub about foreigners. So they joined a mainstream party with enough intolerance to accept them, and then they've subverted it towards their own ends. All this is obvious to anyone paying attention, but particularly to people within the Conservative Parliamentary Party. They all know it, and now they're saying so publicly. But it doesn't do anything unless Theresa May sees it. Now, perhaps she already does, and she has a plan in hand. But do her MPs really trust her that that's the case? If they're wrong, if they think Theresa May's got some cunning plan and they're wrong, they could watch us crash out when they could have actually done something about it. As I talked about a couple of days ago, basically, her plan could easily be to crash out in order to save the party. But would it save the party? Would anything save the party? Would anything doom the party? Maybe nothing would actually split the party. For all anyone knows, Conservative MPs included, any outcome for Brexit might split the party. And any outcome may not do any long-term damage at all. Frankly, the situation is so unreadable that I'd just do the right thing and to hell with the party consequences. Consequences for the country are much more real and much more important. The consequences for society are already in force. I don't think anything can save that now. Both sides are too deeply entrenched. You won't convince either one. In fact, ironically, the only thing that would actually finish the argument would actually be a no deal, crashing out with a no deal. But of course, that would be a disaster. We don't want that, just to shut people up. So, the economy, however, and the living standards of citizens is still up for grabs. That could still be saved or damned. So what's Theresa May's reaction to all this? Well, she didn't attend the debating chamber, so she didn't answer any questions after the vote or anything like that. There were questions for her. The Brexit Secretary and the Chief Whip were invited to answer those questions in her place, but they declined. They were under no obligation to do that. The Speaker made that quite clear. She knew what the result was going to be, or she'd absolutely have been there to crow over it. Instead, she simply let out a statement that it was all Jeremy Corbyn's fault. So, apparently it was Labour's fault, the opposition, for not supporting her amendment when she'd done nothing. She'd not put anything in that was what Labour wanted, but not a word of criticism about the 67 of her own MPs that voted against it. It's quite ironic that someone accuses someone else of playing party politics while they're playing party politics. And that is also a worrying sign, the fact that she won't she'll criticise Jeremy Corbyn for not supporting her motion, which, bear in mind, was a double Conservative motion. But she won't criticise Conservative MPs for not supporting a double Conservative motion. Now, she also said that it won't change her plans to renegotiate with Brussels. So like I said, the votes were largely meaningless, but politically symbolic. So she now goes to the European politicians to argue that she can get her amended deal through Parliament, when of course she's going to go along there and say, right, we need these renegotiations. If you do this, I can absolutely get it through Parliament. To which they'll reply to her, no, you won't. They don't seem to be backing you at all, Mrs May. So it's fairly obvious that she can't. She also leaves for the continent when her party is potentially days away from open rebellion. But as I say, I'm not really sure I see that. I think, people are making a lot about this. That someone linked me an article in The Guardian about it. And yeah, you could read it as, oh, these MPs are getting belligerent, they're threatening to resign, all the rest of it. You don't threaten to resign. If she was taking it seriously, she'd not be going off to Brussels. She knows it's a waste of time anyway. Unless, as I say, she's up to something else. Unless she's negotiating something else, such as an extension behind closed doors, because she's clearly not talking about the backstop. Everyone knows that's a non-starter. So, the greatest area of speculation at this moment in time, quite frankly, is who rebels first with their leader, Labour or the Conservatives, because both of them are threatening to rebel. Theresa May, meanwhile, is just carrying on with her tactic of running down the clock, which, for some purpose, which I talked about a couple of days ago. But nothing will now happen until either May springs her what is clearly now going to be a last-minute surprise. She's obviously waiting for the last moment to spring it, to the point where other people can't do anything about it, or someone else takes over. So basically, either moderate Conservatives or Labour MPs have got to force their leader into action, or it's all over. And it doesn't matter which it is. Jeremy Corbyn, if he gets behind a referendum, can absolutely make something happen here. Theresa May, if the majority of her party actually tell her she's got to pick a side, then that would obviously have an effect. It's a no-brainer if they force her into that situation. She has to pick their side. Not only is she in that side, not only is it the largest part of the party, the ERG are absolutely bluffing. They, as the MPs have said, they have nowhere else to go. What are they going to do? Join UKIP? Join Nigel Farage's new party? They joined the Conservatives not because they share those values, but because it's a mainstream party that can get them power. and they accepted them. That's it. They're not going anywhere. Call their bluff, and it's easy for me to guarantee it, as I already said. It's a win-win for me because I'm not a Conservative supporter, far from it. You know, if she calls their bluff and they do back down, as I believe they would, then great, we get a better outcome, whatever. And if she's wrong and they do split the party, well, that's great for me as well. It means no more Conservatives. Hooray. So I know it's easy for me to say that. But at the same time, something has to happen. Otherwise, we are going to be crashing out on the 29th of March to the sound of Jacob Rees-Mogg chinking his champagne flutes. Actually, probably wouldn't even bother with flutes, would he? He'd just drink straight from the bottle, wouldn't he? But anyway, that's my reading of what happened yesterday. The poll for tomorrow's discussion is still out there, so you can still vote on that. For those who don't know where that is, you just go to the channel, you click on the channel name, and there's a community tab, it's in there. So thanks very much for watching. If you've enjoyed it, click the like button, subscribe for further content, click the bell notification as well, get notified of further content. And until next time, I'll see you later.